The House of Commons is off for the summer, and other than three by-elections set for August 31st, it's all quiet on the federal front. So what better time than now to take a beat and review the many times our parliament wasn't so parliamentary? I'm John Ackermann, and this is the Bookshelf Podcast, and here to talk about Unparliamentary, Tales from Canada's Colourful Parliamentary Past, is author Charlie Feldman. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, the word parliament, Charlie, as you point out, can be traced to the French parler, the verb to speak, while Winston Churchill once observed the object of parliament is to substitute argument for fisticuffs. However, that's not always been the case, at least in our House of Commons, and that's where you come in. What inspired you to write the book, and how did it all come together?
Right. So I worked at Parliament for many, many years and heard a whole bunch of stories that weren't on the tour. And I'll just say when I first took the tour, I thought, wow, not a lot has really happened in this building that's interesting. And then once I started diving in, I started hearing about fistfights, an occasion where an MP pulled out a patch of another one's beard, a time when someone tried to blow up the building, a time when someone came to the gallery and threw feces. And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, this place is way more interesting than people give it credit for. And someone needs to write this book of all the silly stuff. So that's where I come in to kind of say, look, there's a lot more that happened in Parliament than sort of the gallant politics and politicians. No one's written sort of the dessert side of things with the wacky and salacious. And so I wanted to do a project that brought that all together in one place.
Now, by your own admission, you're a lawyer and a self-professed parliamentary nerd, not a trained historian per se, but the story of the book coming together is interesting. You were on the board of the Canadian Study of Parliament group. A former board member asked you if you would address your students that year's House of Commons pages, and after you launched into a few of these stories, one of the pages apparently told you, "Mister, if you wrote a book on this, I'd pre-order it." To which you said, "By gosh, I need to write it."
Yeah, I mean, I will freely admit I first bristled at being called Mister for maybe the second time in my life. And I was like, I'm still in my early 30s. No. But yes, I thought I need to write this book and see where it goes. And that night I told a bunch of interesting ones. So, for example, the time MPs tried to force a prorogation to get more money out of the government. And this actually happened in 1867. So they'd only been sitting for a little bit of time when they decided they weren't getting as much as they thought they deserved. At the time, they got about $6 a day. But if they prorogued the session, I think they got $100 more. So they wanted to get the government to do that, and the government said no. There was also a crazy time in the 70s where a minister resigned because of it had come to light that he had forged papers to allow his married mistress to have an abortion. And of course, it became a big committee inquiry and scandal. And like, it's just one of the things now you can't really think would be a thing. But certainly for that group of pages, there was a lot of interest in that and the just bizarreness. I think also one that they particularly liked was the MP who confessed to missing a portion of a vote, or leaving his seat, I should say, during a vote because he purchased underwear on sale that was too tight and it was uncomfortable for him to sit to long periods. And I think in that occasion, the speaker, in mulling over the matter, said his remarks would be brief. So a lot of jokes to to work with there.
Now, we should also point out that this is an outgrowth of sorts of your social media series, This Day in Parliamentary History. So, in a sense, you'd kind of done some market research and found there was a ready-made appetite for this kind of book.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised. So I gave myself a challenge for a while to find something interesting in Hansard for every day. And freely admit some of it was a bit of a stretch, but you come across all these wild tales that I just had never heard. And then people would message me and say, you really should turn this into a book or do something with it. I remember one that I came across was a security incident involving a Greyhound bus held hostage and taken to Parliament Hill where they fired shots at tourists. And I thought, oh, this is much more interesting than I thought would exist for this random day in parliamentary history. But yeah, I had sort of discovered a lot of things. And then as I started putting it together and going a bit deeper on some of the stories, I uncovered even more. And it was sort of a gift that kept giving. And unfortunately, in the end, it was sort of just a question of space considerations because there's only so much you can put in a book and still have people buy it at reasonable cost. So I would say it's a lot of the big things, but there's still many parliamentary gems left to be discovered, I'm sure, in memoirs and letters somewhere.
Well, I noticed even as you're summing up the book, you're talking about things that you left out, like all the singing that happens in Parliament and the parliamentary bands and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that was a wild story. There used to be a House of Commons social club where the members would get together, I think during the sitting week, and the clerk would apparently play the banjo. And then sort of members would like, sing along and be happy. They used to also do sing-alongs in the chamber when waiting for royal assent to happen. They kind of had nothing to do at the time. They didn't have their own offices, so there was really nowhere to go. And we're told that there was sort of a rivalry between the different factions of the House, particularly like English and French groups, for who could come up with the most boisterous and popular song and get the most people to join in. Even outside the Hill, there was a time when, at various times in the war, they organized mass sing-alongs on Parliament Hill to sort of raise morale and whatnot. So there's a lot more music happening in the chamber than you might expect. Although we have had a speaker's ruling about a member, I believe, playing a flute during a vote, and the speaker ruled that that really shouldn't happen unless someone decide they want to play the bagpipes during a proceeding. So we're not expecting too much more music to happen in the Commons.
Now, the title of the book, Unparliamentary, that refers to things that one wouldn't typically associate with Parliament, words and conduct that run afoul of parliamentary rules and customs. And one of the better traveled anecdotes about Parliament is the time that our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, apparently vomited mid-speech. But as you explain, this may not have actually happened. What did happen here?
So yeah, so the story goes that Sir John A. at some point vomited mid-speech, and his opponent says, "Oh my gosh, can you guys really support this drunkard in office?" And John A. retorts something to the effect of, "Well, it's not the drink that got me here; it's my colleagues' policies, or it's his face that does this to me." And there's a million different versions of this, including somewhere it happens in the Commons. Others have it on a railway platform at a constituency meeting. And I tried to figure out what was the source of this story because a number of people had told it to me as he had vomited in the Commons. And I thought, well, surely there'd be plenty of newspaper coverage of that if it happened. And I couldn't find anything. And so in the biographies and other stories of his life where this story is told in some way, it sort of has no footnote, no trace. And in digging more, I discovered the origin appears to be a biography written about him in the year that he died. And in that retelling, it's very vague. It says he's in a North Ontario constituency against a candidate whom we'll call Jones. It doesn't tell us, well, why we have a fake name and we're not quite sure where we are. But in the preface to that book, which is the only book that really gets cited for this story when people actually bother to go back in time, the author says, listen, I was working on a biography of Sir John A. Macdonald, and then he died, and the publisher was like, can you speed up? So I only had 5 weeks to put this together. I'm sure there's mistakes. And unfortunately, I think everyone who has sort of cited it since has sort of gone to the body of the text and never looked at the preface to see if this really, really happened. We have no contemporaneous source, no newspaper account that tells us this happened. And it's really tough for me to imagine that someone who is likely a prominent politician at the time, and depending when it was in pre-Confederation Canada, if it was actually in that part of his career, he might have been in opposition or what have you, that we have no sort of newspaper story that can tell us, like no one can say at this rally on this date with any certainty. So it's one that's well traveled. I think we just like it for sort of the, rebel spirit and quick retort, but we've absolutely no way to pin it down in time to say this happened.
A story too good to be true, perhaps.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a number of those on Parliament Hill.
Now, you've got the book divided into 9 separate chapters, everything from fistic and other encounters and great minds drink alike to not so routine proceedings. And it's a scandal, to name a few. We touched on this a little bit before, but were there any stories that didn't make the cut?
There's a number that didn't make the cut for different reasons. Sometimes because I didn't have enough detail to go on, or there wasn't really too much more to the story. So, for example, on 2 different occasions, actually, someone's run through the house dressed as Santa Claus near Christmas. But there's really nothing more to say because the record doesn't tell us who it was, and I have not been able to track down reporting to say that. One story that got cut along the way has to do with a member who, this is in the early days, basically says, I have the proof that the government is lying. It's right here in my desk. And then he goes to open his desk, and at the time they had little keys, and his key doesn't work. And then he sort of looks to a colleague like, can I borrow yours? Maybe we switched keys. And then as different papers tell it, not all consistently, it seems like keys started getting thrown at him. And as he gets showered in keys, he's trying different ones and none of them work. And sort of he goes back to his office ashamed. But the sort of, I love the visual of that, but there was a lot of conflict on like how many keys actually got thrown. Was it just like one, or was it a whole shower? Were people actually laughing? So because it was so varied in the reporting, I'm sure something happened with a member who said something's in my desk and then couldn't get his desk open. But beyond that, I didn't have enough really to say. So there's a number of things that got cut like that, or little asides where, there's a lot of asides in the book, I will freely note, but somewhere I was just like, I have no place really to put this little gem. But there are certainly many stories that didn't quite make it.
Now, the book's been out for a few weeks now. Any feedback so far from your colleagues on the Hill in the legislative precinct?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a few former members reach out to me and say they loved it. Really enjoyed the stories they're in. Most of my colleagues have said things like, "Wow, I'm really happy you did this. I had no idea that happened." I have yet to get any sort of pushback. Maybe people are saving their fire on that. I don't know. Maybe when the real reviews come in the papers, we'll see what people had to say. But no, the reaction's been overwhelmingly positive, which makes me really happy that people are enjoying it. And who knows where we'll go. I'm working on a French version now, so we'll see that we'll have some different stories in it. One, for example, to go back to your previous question, it's not in the English as much. It's more of a passing reference. Has to do with a railway strike in the 70s where some windows and center block got smashed and some art got destroyed. And there's just more reporting on it because it involved, if I'm not mistaken, a union from Quebec. So I had more sort of quotes in the French press and whatnot to use. So yeah, those kind of things also sort of dictate a little bit where where the stories went and what happened with them.
I'm sure you could do even regional editions as well. You mentioned a particular incident in British Columbia where an item, let's call it
Mm,
that, was left
okay.
on someone's desk in the legislature.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at what I can find from the provincial ones, and it's there's just really random stories. That BC one, I think, will keep radio friendly by not saying what the item was. Right, to say you would not expect an adult object to end there. There's even an incident, thinking randomly. There's the fun story from PEI involving a legislator who was eventually kicked out for using his government calling card to call adult hotlines. We have I think in the book there's briefly the story of the Newfoundland sort of premier's son punching somebody else in the chamber and going away. Most recently, I mean, for people watching the news now, we had the incident in New Brunswick in the MLA who finished his speech and then read into the record the sort of remaining ChatGPT entrails of, I can provide a more natural language version if you want. To say there's parliaments that always provide something, and they will continue to be a gift that keeps giving. I mean, there's also, not to pick on New Brunswick here, but the video of the member who's flicking off other members after a particularly heated debate and then gets suspended. Yeah, our provinces provide things. I'm also just thinking out west, not to, so anyone feels excluded. The Alberta member who finished his speech by chugging a beer more recently. So yeah, there's something from all over.
What do you hope people get out of the book?
I hope people read it and think, oh, wow, they're just people. And I think maybe we get a little more realistic about when we elect people. We're not thinking, oh, this is the, next Messiah or something like that, right? Let's keep realistic expectations. I'm hoping there's also somebody out there who has thought about joining politics and then sort of self-selected out saying, well, no, I could never be, I'm not that sort of buttoned up, this, that, and the other thing, and say, well, no, neither are they. Like, I don't need to be this image of, a perfect, angel, right? There's clearly all this other stuff that happens. People are people. And maybe, on the Ottawa side, I would hope that people get out of it the fact that parliamentary history is worth exploring and worth celebrating, and perhaps a little more effort can go into sharing that part of the story that maybe doesn't always present us in the best of light, but is also part of the tale. And if we sort of sweep it under the carpet, I think we lose a lot of the color and richness of the institutions here.
Well, as you put it, if honesty is the best policy, perhaps it's time to be honest about some of the odd things that happen in the institutions at the heart of our democracy.
Absolutely.
The name of the book is Unparliamentary, Tales from Canada's Colourful Parliamentary Past. It's available from AVO UTP. My thanks to author Charlie Feldman.
Thanks so much for having me.
Look for the bookshelf wherever you find your podcast. And as always, you can read more at johnackerman.substack.com.